This is the History of Portugal Podcast, an Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Check us out on our Facebook page, the History of Portugal Podcast, on YouTube, as well as my website, www.eattomyownbeat.com. Welcome back. This is the History of Portugal, episode 106, Expansion into Al-Andalus. Initially, it appeared that Ibn Tashfin had little interest in involving the Almoravids in the politics of Al-Andalus. After the collapse of the Caliphate of Cordoba in the early 11th century, Al-Andalus had split into smaller kingdom or city-states known as taifas. These states constantly fought with each other, but were unable to raise large armies of their own, so they became reliant instead on the Christian kingdoms of the north for military support. This support was secured through the regular payment of pares, or tributes, to the Christian kings, but the payments became a fiscal burden that drained the treasuries of these local rulers. In turn, the Taifa rulers burdened their subjects with increased taxation, including taxes and tariffs that were not considered legal under Islamic law. After the payments of the tribute began to falter, the Christian kingdoms resorted to punitive raids and eventually to conquest. The Taifa kings were unwilling or unable to unite to counter the threat, and even the most powerful Taifa kingdom, Seville, was unable to resist the Christian advances. After the Almoravid capture of Ceuta in 1083, on the southern shore of the Strait of Gibraltar, the way was now open for Ibn Tashfin to intervene in Al-Andalus. It was the same year that Alfonso VI, King of Castile and Leon, led a military campaign into southern Al-Andalus to punish Mu'tamid of Seville for failing to pay him tribute. His expedition penetrated all the way into Tarifa, the southernmost point in the Iberian Peninsula. A couple of years later, in May 1085, he seized control of Toledo, previously one of the most powerful city-states in Al-Andalus. Soon after, he also began the siege of Zaragoza. These dramatic events forced the Taifas kings to finally consider seeking an external intervention by the Almoravids. According to the most detailed Arabic source, it was Mu'tamid, the ruler of Seville, who convened a meeting with his neighbors al-Mutawakkil of Badajoz, and Abdillah ibn Bulgin of Granada, where they agreed to send an embassy to Ibn Tashfin to appeal for his assistance. The Taifan kings were aware of the risks that came with an Almoravid intervention, but considered it the best choice among their bad options. Al-Mutib is said to have remarked bitterly, "Better to pasture camels than to be a swineherd," meaning that it was better to submit to another Muslim ruler than to end up subjects of a Christian king. As a condition for its assistance, Ibn Tashfin demanded that Algeciras, a city on the northern shore of the Strait of Gibraltar across from Ceuta, be surrendered to him so he could use it as a base for his troops. Al-Mu'tamid agreed. Ibn Tashfin, wary of the hesitation of the Taifa kings, immediately sent an advance force of 500 troops across the strait to take control of the Algeciras. They did so in July 1086, without encountering resistance. The rest of the Almoravid army, numbering around 12,000, soon followed. Ibn Tashfin and his army then marched to Seville, where they met up with the forces of al-Mu'tamid, al-Mutawakkil, and Abdallah ibn Bulgin. Alfonso VI, hearing of this development, lifted his siege of Saragossa and marched south to confront him. The two sides met at a place of Badajoz called Zalika in Arabic sources and Sarajaz in Christian sources. In the Battle of Sarajaz, or the Battle of Zalika, on October 23, 1086, Alfonso was soundly defeated and forced to retreat north in disorder. Al-Mu'tamid recommended that they press their advantage, but Ibn Tashfin did not pursue the Christian army further, returning instead to Seville, then to North Africa. It is possible he was unwilling to be away from his home base for too long, or that his death of his eldest son, Sir, encouraged him to return. After Ibn Tashfin's departure, Alfonso VI quickly resumed his pressure on the Taifa kings and forced them to send tribute payments once again. He captured the fortress of Aledo, cutting off eastern Al-Andalus from all other Muslim kingdoms. Meanwhile, Ibn Rashid, the ruler of Murcia, was embroiled in a rivalry with al-Mutabid of Seville. As a result, this time it was the elites of the notables Wuju of Al-Andalus who now called for help from Almoravids rather than to the kings. In May or June 1088, Ibn Tashfin landed at Algeciras with another army, soon joined by al-Mutabid of Seville, Abdallah ibn Bulgan of Granada, and by other troops sent by Ibn Sumadih of Almeria and Ibn Rashka of Murcia. They then set out to retake Aledo. The siege, however, was undermined by rivalries and disunity among the Taifa kings. News eventually reached the Muslims that Alfonso VI was bringing an army to help the Castilian garrison. In November 1088, Ibn Tashfin lifted the siege and returned to North Africa again, having achieved nothing. Alfonso VI sent his trusted commander, Alvar Fanez, to pressure the Taifa kings once again. He succeeded in forcing Abdullah ibn Bulgan to resume tribute payments and began to pressure the al-Mutab in return. In 1090, Ibn Tashfin returned to Al-Andalus again, but at this point he seemed to have given up on the Taifa kings and now intended to take direct control of the region. The Almoravid cause benefited from support of the Malaki and Al-Andalus, who extolled the Almoravid devotion to jihad while criticizing the Taifa kings as impious, self-indulgent, and thus illegitimate. In September 1090, Ibn Tashfin forced Granada to surrender to him and sent Abdullah ibn Bulgan into exile in Agmat. He then returned to North Africa again, but this time he left his nephew, Sir Ibn Abu Bakr, in charge of the Almoravid forces in Al-Andalus. Al-Mutamid, seeking to salvage his position, resorts to striking an alliance with Alfonso VI, which further undermined his own popular support. In early 1091, the Almoravids took control of Cordoba and turned towards Seville, defeating a Castilian force led by Alvar Fanez that came to help al-Mutabid in September 1091. Al-Mutabid surrendered Seville to the Almoravids and was exiled to Agmat. In late 1091, the Almoravids captured Almeria in the late 1091 or January 1092. Ibn Aishia, one of Ibn Tashfin's sons, seized control of Murcia. Thank you for listening to the History of Portugal podcast, a Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Get more information on the History of Portugal podcast on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out www.eattomyownbeat.com for more information on our travels.